They may have uncovered the true origins of Britain's most famous monument. This is the story of the lost circle of Stonehenge.
For thousands of years, the great stones of Salisbury Plain have stood in silence, rising from the English countryside like the bones of a forgotten giant. Stonehenge has been one of humanity's greatest enigmas. Its towering trilithons, circular arrangement, and perfect astronomical alignment have left scientists, historians, and dreamers asking the same haunting question: why was it built, and by whom? Generations of archaeologists have chipped away at the mystery. Some believed it was a temple to the sun. Others thought it was a burial ground, a ceremonial site, or even an ancient calendar. Myths tied it to Merlin, the wizard of Arthurian legend. Conspiracies linked it to extraterrestrials, claiming no prehistoric culture could have moved stones weighing over 40 tons without advanced technology. But for all the speculation, one truth remained. No definitive answer ever came. Until now. A new wave of technology has cracked the silence of Stonehenge. Using advanced ground-penetrating radar, geophysical surveys, and chemical analysis, scientists have uncovered evidence hidden beneath the soil, evidence that changes everything we thought we knew about this ancient monument. And what they found is as shocking as it is unsettling. The breakthrough began not at Stonehenge itself, but in the surrounding landscape. For years, researchers suspected the monument was not an isolated structure, but part of a larger ceremonial complex. To test this theory, they conducted sweeping radar scans of the entire area. What appeared on the screens was staggering. Beneath the green fields, dozens of massive pits and aligned structures emerged, forming an enormous underground pattern stretching for miles. Stonehenge was not standing alone. It was the center of a vast, interconnected network. Some of these buried features were ancient pathways, others were wooden structures long rotted away, and still others were monumental pits, precisely dug and arranged in a circle around the stones. The sheer scale of it suggested a level of organization far beyond what was expected of Stone Age communities. Whoever built this did not simply drag rocks into place, they engineered an entire sacred landscape. The question was why? Excavations at the pits yielded clues. At their bottoms, archaeologists found animal bones, tools, and human remains deliberately placed in ritual fashion. This was no casual disposal of the dead. These were offerings, sacrifices perhaps, made as part of ceremonies that stretched across generations. The buried bones showed evidence of burning, some cracked by intense heat, others arranged carefully, as if meant to be preserved forever beneath the earth. But what startled scientists most was the age. Radiocarbon dating revealed that the earliest phases of the Stonehenge complex stretched back not just 5,000 years, but even earlier, connecting it to Neolithic cultures whose identities remain unknown. The builders of Stonehenge were not a single group, but generations of people working across centuries, passing down knowledge with a precision that bordered on the impossible. The stones themselves added another layer to the mystery. Long known as sarsen and bluestones, they had baffled geologists for decades. The smaller bluestones, weighing up to 4 tons each, were traced to quarries in Wales over 150 miles away. Moving them across rivers, hills, and forests would have been an incredible feat, even with modern machinery. The new surveys, however, revealed something more unsettling. Some of the stones had been altered with techniques far beyond what was believed possible for that era. Microscopic analysis showed patterns consistent with intense heat treatment and polishing. Were the builders experimenting with primitive forms of engineering, or had they inherited techniques from an even older source? Then came the astronomical revelations. Using sophisticated software, researchers simulated the sky as it appeared thousands of years ago. The alignment of Stonehenge to the summer and winter solstices had long been known. But now it was discovered that the surrounding pits, ditches, and wooden monuments also lined up with the movements of the moon and even specific eclipses. Stonehenge was not merely a calendar. It was a cosmic observatory, capable of predicting celestial events with eerie accuracy. What shocked scientists further was that the layout of the underground structures suggested something more than astronomy. The pits seemed to trace pathways that matched star constellations. The monument may not only have been designed to mark the heavens above, it may have been built as a mirror of the cosmos itself. The implications were staggering. How could Neolithic people, with no writing system and no advanced tools, have mapped the stars with such precision? How did they move stones heavier than tanks across miles of rugged terrain? And why did they devote centuries of effort to building and expanding the monument? Some researchers argued that Stonehenge was a place of healing. Excavations uncovered skeletons of people who had traveled great distances, their bones showing signs of disease or injury. Perhaps they had come seeking the monument's power, believing it to be a sacred hospital of sorts. Others insisted it was a temple of the dead, a portal between worlds where rituals were performed to commune with ancestors or gods. But a darker theory emerged from the latest discoveries. The careful placement of human remains, the burned bones, the alignment with celestial events. Some scientists began to suggest Stonehenge may have been used for sacrificial rites timed with the heavens. The monument could have been a stage where life and death were orchestrated in rhythm with the cosmos, binding human fate to the stars above. And then there was the most controversial idea of all, that Stonehenge was a legacy, not a beginning. That its builders were inheriting knowledge from a culture long forgotten, one wiped out by disaster or time. The underground pits, aligned so perfectly, could be fragments of an older system. Stonehenge may not have been the origin, but the continuation of something far more ancient. The evidence is there, buried in the soil, written in the stones. The mystery of Stonehenge may finally be cracked. But the answers are more shocking than anyone expected. Because if this monument was built to mirror the stars, to align life, death, and sacrifice with cosmic cycles, then Stonehenge is not just a ruin. It is a message, and we are only beginning to understand what it says. The revelations from the underground surveys were only the beginning. Once archaeologists started digging more carefully into the surrounding landscape of Stonehenge, they began to realize that the monument was not a solitary mystery at all. It was just one piece of a vast ceremonial puzzle. What lay beneath the green fields of Salisbury Plain was bigger, older, and more complex than anyone had dared to imagine. And the discoveries that followed would shock even the most skeptical minds. It began with the burials. For years, scientists believed that only a handful of cremated remains were interred at Stonehenge. But new excavations and soil analysis revealed dozens more, many of them deliberately placed in the outer ring of ditches and pits. When these bones were subjected to modern DNA testing, the results were astonishing. These were not all local people. Some had genetic markers linked to distant regions, Wales, Scotland, and even the European mainland. This meant Stonehenge was not merely a local shrine. It was a place of pilgrimage drawing people from across vast distances. Even more unsettling was what their bones revealed about their lives. Many showed signs of illness, cancer, joint disease, or injuries that had never fully healed. A striking number of them were young men with broken bones that seemed to have been tended to, but not successfully. This supported the theory that Stonehenge was a kind of prehistoric healing center, a place where the sick and wounded came hoping for miracles. But if it was meant as a sanctuary, the presence of burned bones suggested something more disturbing: ritual sacrifice. Chemical analysis of the cremated remains provided another layer of shock. The isotopes in the teeth and bones revealed that some of these individuals had consumed unusual diets before their deaths, including high levels of plants and herbs not native to the area. Could these have been ceremonial diets, perhaps intended to prepare them for ritual? Or were they treated with strange medicinal practices that ended in tragedy? But the biggest surprise came from the children. Among the remains were several young individuals, barely into their teens. Their presence raised haunting questions. Were they brought here by families seeking healing for sick children? Or were they chosen for something darker, offered as sacrifices in ceremonies tied to the cycles of the sun and moon? The alignment of pits and burials with solstices suggested that death itself may have been orchestrated to coincide with celestial events, binding human lives to the heavens. The surrounding area deepened the mystery even further. The radar surveys revealed other massive structures, particularly the Stonehenge at Durrington Walls, a gigantic circular site just 2 miles from Stonehenge. Beneath its surface lay traces of enormous wooden posts, once forming the largest timber monument in Europe. It was here that archaeologists uncovered entire villages, complete with houses, pottery, and tools. It seemed Stonehenge was not an isolated monument, but the ceremonial heart of a much larger community. Evidence from Durrington Walls suggested feasting on a grand scale. Animal bones, particularly pigs and cattle, were found in enormous quantities, many of them slaughtered at a very specific age, around 9 months old. That age matched the timing of midwinter solstice festivals. These were not random meals, they were ritual banquets tied to the cosmic calendar. Thousands may have gathered here, feasting, celebrating, and perhaps mourning before processing toward the great stones. The DNA analysis of the animal bones revealed something shocking as well. Many of the pigs were not local, but had been brought from as far as Scotland. Just as humans had traveled great distances to Stonehenge, so too had animals, herded across hundreds of miles, likely as offerings. This was not simply a local ritual site. It was a magnet that drew entire communities, uniting distant tribes in shared ceremonies. But what truly stunned researchers was the connection between the sites. The underground surveys showed that Stonehenge, Durrington Walls, and other nearby monuments were linked by avenues, pathways that aligned directly with the River Avon. These were not random routes. The avenues were designed to channel processions toward the stones, creating a theatrical journey from life to death, from wood to stone, from river to sky. The symbolism was striking. Wooden structures associated with life and the living stood at Durrington Walls. Stonehenge, cold and eternal, represented death and the afterlife. The river winding between them acted as the boundary between the two worlds. Every part of the landscape had meaning. The builders were not just moving stones. They were building an entire cosmic map where human life and death were stages in a grand celestial drama. One discovery in particular drove this point home. At the base of one burial pit, archaeologists found a carefully arranged deposit, a polished axe head, a handful of carved bone objects, and a fragment of bluestone. These items were not randomly placed. They were offerings, and they were aligned with the rising sun on the winter solstice. It seemed that even in death, the people buried here were positioned to join the eternal cycle of the stars. But the deeper the excavations went, the stranger the story became. Some of the pits showed signs of being re-dug centuries after the first burials. Layers of soil suggested that generations had returned, reopening old graves, removing bones, and then sealing them again. What could drive people to disturb their dead? Were they seeking to commune with their ancestors, or was Stonehenge part of a much older tradition of death rituals that stretched back into prehistory? One thing was certain: Stonehenge was no simple monument. It was not just a calendar, or a temple, or a burial site. It was all of these things at once, a living system that merged life, death, time, and the cosmos into one. Yet one final discovery shocked scientists most of all. Among the genetic analysis of remains, one skeleton carried markers unlike the others. This individual was not from Britain, nor from nearby Europe. The isotopes suggested origins far to the east, possibly the Mediterranean or even beyond. This raised a staggering possibility. Stonehenge was not merely a local monument, but part of a vast prehistoric network connecting distant peoples across continents. What had drawn travelers across oceans and mountains to this place? Was it the promise of healing, the spectacle of ritual, or the power of the stones themselves? Whatever the answer, Stonehenge was no longer just an English mystery. It was part of a global story, one we are only beginning to understand. And with every new discovery, one question echoed louder: who were the people that first envisioned this cosmic machine, and what knowledge did they truly possess? The closer scientists looked at Stonehenge, the more impossible the story seemed. For decades, schoolbooks taught that it was simply a gathering of tribes who dragged stones across fields, using ropes, logs, and sheer determination. But the discoveries of recent years have forced experts to admit that the engineering of Stonehenge is far more advanced than once believed. The shocking truth is that whoever built it understood mathematics, astronomy, and construction techniques far beyond what we thought Neolithic people could achieve. The first mystery is the stones themselves. The massive outer sarsens, some weighing more than 40 tons, came from Marlborough Downs, about 20 miles away. 20 miles may sound small in modern terms, but imagine transporting stones heavier than trucks without wheels, cranes, or modern roads. Even more puzzling are the smaller, bluestones, which weigh up to 4 tons each and were traced to quarries in the Preseli Hills of Wales, nearly 150 miles away. How did they get here? For years, the dominant theory was that Neolithic people used wooden sledges and rolled the stones on logs. But experiments show this would have required tens of thousands of trees and enormous manpower. Others proposed that the stones were dragged on boats along rivers, but evidence for such large-scale shipping remains thin. New theories suggest that the builders may have used complex sledges lubricated with animal fat, or even primitive rail-like systems made of grooved timbers. Still, even these ideas struggle to explain the sheer number of stones moved across such distances. And yet the most shocking detail is not just that the stones were moved. It is how they were shaped. Microscopic analysis has revealed that many of the sarsens and bluestones were deliberately dressed with precision, smoothed and grooved so they would fit together tightly. Some of the stones even have mortise and tenon joints, the same method used in carpentry to this day, ensuring the uprights locked perfectly with the lintels above them. This was not random stacking. It was deliberate engineering, created with a knowledge of stability and design previously uncredited to prehistoric builders. The monument's astronomical alignment deepens the puzzle. Everyone knows Stonehenge aligns with the solstices. The midsummer sun rises in perfect alignment with the heel stone, while the midwinter sun sets directly between the great trilithons. But new research has revealed even more complexity. The positioning of certain pits and stones matches lunar standstills, rare events in which the moon's rise and set reach extreme positions on the horizon, occurring only once every 18.6 years. This means the builders not only tracked the sun, but also had a precise knowledge of lunar cycles over decades. The question is how. Without writing, telescopes, or advanced tools, how did Neolithic people record cycles spanning nearly 2 decades? The accuracy suggests long-term observation and an oral tradition of knowledge passed across generations. Some researchers now believe Stonehenge may have functioned as an ancient observatory capable of predicting eclipses and other celestial events. If true, it was more than a ceremonial site. It was a prehistoric science center. But the engineering mysteries don't stop there. Geophysical surveys have revealed that Stonehenge is part of a massive geometric layout across the plain. Avenues connect the stones to the river Avon, forming pathways aligned with celestial events. Other nearby monuments, wooden circles, burial mounds, and ditches, appear to be part of a larger sacred grid. The precision is unsettling. It suggests that Stonehenge was designed not in isolation, but as part of a master plan spanning miles of landscape. One recent study uncovered that the sarsen stones are arranged according to geometric principles that resemble the Pythagorean theorem, over 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born. This has led to whispers that the builders had a mathematical system long before written history records such knowledge. Was it coincidence, or did they inherit geometry from an even older, forgotten source? The more scientists dig, the stranger it becomes. Some of the bluestones contain unusual acoustic properties. When struck, they produce ringing tones, almost like bells. Experiments suggest these stones may have been chosen not just for their location, but for their sound. Could Stonehenge have been a giant instrument used in rituals where sound and vibration played a role in altering human consciousness? If so, the builders were not only astronomers and engineers, they were also masters of sound. Then there are the remains of fires and charred soil around the site. Evidence suggests that enormous bonfires were lit during ceremonies, their flames visible for miles. Imagine thousands of people gathered at midwinter, feasting at Durrington walls, then walking in procession by torchlight to the stones. The fires blazing, the bluestones ringing, the sun or moon perfectly aligned. It would have been a spectacle of power, binding communities together under a cosmic clock. Yet even with all this evidence, one chilling question lingers: why build it at all? Moving stones across hundreds of miles, shaping them with precision, aligning them with celestial events, this required enormous effort. Why devote centuries of labor to such a monument? Theories abound. Some say it was a temple of healing, where people came in hope of miracles. Others argue it was a gateway between worlds, connecting the living with the dead. The astronomical precision suggests it was a cosmic calendar, perhaps even a means of predicting eclipses or marking agricultural cycles. And then there are those who believe it was never about practical use at all, that it was built as a legacy, a message left behind for future generations. The most unsettling idea, however, is that Stonehenge may not have been unique. Across the world, ancient monuments share similar alignments. The pyramids of Giza with Orion, the temples of Mesoamerica with solstices, the megalithic structures of Malta aligned with the rising sun. Was Stonehenge part of a global prehistoric network where distant peoples shared knowledge of the heavens? If so, then the builders of Stonehenge were not simple farmers dragging stones across the countryside. They were astronomers, mathematicians, and engineers working with knowledge that should not have existed in their time. Knowledge we still struggle to understand today. The stones remain silent and immovable, but the evidence uncovered in their joints, alignments, and acoustics tells a shocking truth: Stonehenge was far more than a pile of rocks. It was a machine of knowledge, a bridge between earth and sky, life and death, sound and silence. And perhaps most haunting of all, it still works. On solstice mornings, the sun still rises exactly where the builders intended. Thousands gather to watch, standing in awe, just as their ancestors did 5,000 years ago. Whatever message the builders carved into the land with stone and fire, it continues to speak across the ages. The question now is not just how they built it, but why. And that question leads to even darker possibilities. Possibilities that scientists are only beginning to uncover. The story of Stonehenge has always been wrapped in myth, but the latest discoveries have given those myths a chilling new edge. Archaeologists digging deeper into the landscape surrounding the monument uncovered something more shocking than engineering feats or astronomical alignments. They found bones, hundreds of them, and those bones tell a story of ritual death and a society that may have used Stonehenge not only as a temple of the heavens, but also as a stage for acts that still unsettle us today. For years, the cremated remains buried within the outer ring of ditches were thought to represent honored ancestors. But as technology improved, researchers began extracting tiny fragments of DNA and isotopic signatures from the ashes. What they found was disturbing. Some of the individuals were indeed locals, but many were not. They came from as far away as Scotland, Wales, and even continental Europe, and many of them had not lived long lives. Children and young adults dominated the burials, raising the possibility that they had not come to Stonehenge willingly. The fractures on bones revealed evidence of violence. Some skulls bore sharp cuts, others showed blunt, forced trauma. Certain remains were burned in ways that suggested deliberate ritual rather than accidental fire. Scientists could no longer deny what the evidence suggested: Stonehenge may have been a site of sacrificial rites, ceremonies timed with celestial events where human life was offered to forces greater than the tribe. The pattern was too precise to be coincidence. Several of the burials were aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. In one pit, the remains of a young boy were found, his ashes mixed with animal bones and carefully placed artifacts: a polished stone tool, a carved antler, and fragments of bluestone. His body had not been laid to rest casually. He had been positioned to face the rising sun at midsummer, as though his death was meant to mirror the rebirth of light. Elsewhere, archaeologists uncovered skulls that had been deliberately altered, grooves carved into the bone, circular holes drilled with primitive tools. Some suggested this was evidence of early medical practices like trepanation to relieve pain or seizures. But the sheer number of modified skulls and their placement around ritual pits suggested something darker: ceremonial acts performed not to heal but to transform, or perhaps to offer parts of the body as sacred relics. The discovery of a massive ceremonial avenue connecting Stonehenge to the river Avon only deepened the unease. Processions likely carried the dead, or the sacrificed, along this path, from life at the river to death at the stones. Wooden structures at Durrington walls represented the realm of the living, while Stonehenge, eternal and cold, stood as the realm of the dead. The river was the threshold between worlds. Every detail of the landscape was designed to orchestrate humanity's most primal drama, the passage from life into eternity. But not everyone agrees with the interpretation of sacrifice. Some researchers argue that Stonehenge was less a place of ritual killing and more a sanctuary of healing. They point to skeletons showing signs of disease, bone cancer, deformities, broken limbs. They argue that these people traveled across Britain and Europe to seek the stones' supposed powers. Perhaps the remains reflect those who did not survive their pilgrimage, rather than those deliberately offered. Still, even the healing theory cannot escape the unsettling rituals tied to the stones. Why bury the dead with such cosmic precision? Why align human remains with the solstices, the moon, and the stars? Whether sacrifice or sanctuary,